Hey guys, tonight we slip into the softest corners of history, lit by candlelight and cluttered with parchment, to explore why being too educated, too curious, or simply too bookish could get you into very warm trouble, of the torch and pitchfork kind. You'll smell the wax melting as a scroll is hidden beneath robes, feel breath on your neck in crowded salons, and hear secrets whispered in ink before they're burned. The more you know, the more dangerous you become. So snuggle in. The fire's not just for heat tonight. If mellow history helps you relax, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Let me know in the comments what time it is, where you are, and where you're listening from. I'd love to see how far this sleepy scroll is traveling tonight. All right, time to close your eyes, take a breath, and walk softly into the shadows of the past. You tiptoe into a grand, echoing space. It's cold, lined with towering shelves and soft candlelight, the smell of ink and dust thick in the air. Somewhere, a feather quill scratches paper. Slowly, almost seductively, you're in an ancient library. Not just any, but the kind you weren't meant to find. You run your fingers along the spines of forbidden books, and every title hums with danger. In this place, knowledge has sharp teeth. See, in the ancient world, being educated wasn't just admirable. It could be downright treacherous, especially if you knew more than your ruler. Or worse, if you asked the wrong question, the kind that made empires uncomfortable, even back in Mesopotamia. Yes, the cradle of writing. Scribes were a suspicious lot. Sure, they wore robes and carried tablets, but those tablets held more than tax records. Some scholars whispered coded poems, political critiques, even early recipes for love spells. Reading wasn't casual, it was power. And power? Always a little bit sexy. And a whole lot dangerous. In ancient Egypt, scribes held elite positions, tucked away in temple complexes, handling sacred texts. But if you copied the wrong spell from the Book of the Dead, or snuck a peek at royal secrets, let's just say mummification wasn't always posthumous. Historians still argue whether certain scribal accidents were truly accidental or strategic silences. A missing scroll here, a vanished scholar there. And you're not just reading history now, you're feeling it. The cold breath of risk down your collar. Fast forward to ancient China. Imperial scholars were drilled day and night to memorize Confucian texts, pages upon pages of philosophy about order, harmony, and the perfect society. But if your essays didn't align with the emperor's mood, you might be writing your own execution speech. Imagine failing your exam and winding up in prison. Ivy League stress has nothing on dynastic peril. Sometimes the most dangerous act was simply asking why. Why do we bow to kings? Why is the sun a god? Why do women disappear after marriage, and so do their books? These questions were the intellectual equivalent of lighting a match in a library soaked with oil. They burned. Quietly, beautifully, and with consequences. Take the ancient Greeks. Everyone fawns over their love of wisdom, their democracy, their debates. But those wine-fueled symposiums, they weren't just for fun. They were arenas. Your words could win hearts, but they could also paint targets on your back. One philosopher praises moderation, another slips in a dig about the gods, and suddenly, someone's being exiled or poisoned. The joke goes. In ancient Athens, if you were smart enough to win arguments, you were smart enough to know when to leave. Fast. Some educated figures maneuvered better than others. Take Hypatia of Alexandria, mathematician, philosopher, teacher. She gave lectures in flowing robes and drew crowds of men. And not just for her geometry skills. She radiated intelligence, unapologetically. A woman with a voice and a chalkboard. And how did that end? You'll hear her again later. Her story isn't for the faint of heart. You breathe slowly. Maybe education isn't just about scrolls and ink. Maybe it's always been about control. Who gets it? Who keeps it? And who dares to teach it without permission? You drift a little deeper now. Think of how even in storytelling, the wise ones, the witches, the old librarians, the rebels with maps, are always the first to be questioned, or burned, or silenced. There's something deliciously suspicious about people who know things, who see patterns, who don't need a sword to start a revolution. You lean back against a marble column. Somewhere behind you, a book closes softly. Dust lifts, like breath from a sleeping mouth. You're starting to see it, aren't you? That knowledge isn't neutral. It's intimate, threatening, dangerous, like whispering someone's secrets in a crowded room and pretending it's just trivia. And the whispers go on. Did you know the earliest known university, in Timbuktu, Mali, was almost erased from history by colonial forces? Its scholars wrote poetry, astronomy, medicine. Some of the texts still hide in desert caves. It wasn't just time that tried to erase them. It was fear. Fear of what those minds might still ignite. You wander farther into the shelves. Each step is slower, heavier. You're not just walking through history now. You're haunted by it. The faint sound of pages turning becomes rhythmic, like a heartbeat or a countdown. And suddenly you understand. Being too educated has always meant being a little too alive. Too hard to control, too curious for comfort. But don't worry. You're safe. For now, just stay quiet. Don't turn too many pages at once. And if you hear someone behind you whisper your name, well, maybe just pretend you didn't. The candle flickers. You're still in the library, but the air shifts, thicker now, warmer. You trace the scent of papyrus and burning cedar through colonnades until it opens up into a great marble hall. The light dims, not from nightfall, but from smoke. Somewhere above, the sky is weeping ash. You've arrived at Alexandria. Not the modern one with cars and city lights, but the Alexandria, ancient, golden, and humming with the reckless ambition of minds set free. Here lies the great library, once the crown jewel of knowledge on earth. Think scrolls piled high enough to press time into parchment. Think scholars from India, Egypt, Greece, and Persia, speaking in 100 tongues, writing in 10 scripts, all thinking in whispers. But Alexandria is no utopia, because when knowledge gathers, politics stalks it like a jealous ex. The library is surrounded by tension, silent, sticky, and flammable. Literally. The walls know things they shouldn't, and so do the people inside them. You walk between shelves crammed with translations, Buddhist texts sitting beside shipwreck records, maps of the stars next to ancient erotic poetry. It's not just an archive, it's a threat. Every scroll here might prove a ruler wrong, a myth false, a god invented. Legend says Julius Caesar accidentally set the place ablaze during a siege, but historians still argue whether it was an accident or whether burning books was just more convenient than debating them. Fires are fast. Arguments take time. You hear a soft voice in the dark, a woman teaching. Her name is Hypatia. Remember her? She's not a footnote yet. Not just the first female mathematician, as your high school textbook muttered. No, She's fire in linen robes. She runs her own school, teaches men and women. She charts stars and solves equations that will be forgotten for 1,000 years. She is Alexandria's heartbeat and its open wound. But not everyone likes a woman who solves problems without praying first. Christian zealots, thirsty for purity, power, and probably a scapegoat, decide she knows too much, too pagan, too poised, too unafraid. So one morning they drag her from her chariot and onto the street. You don't need the full details, only the silence that follows. The great library loses its greatest voice, not to debate, not to exile, but to fear wrapped in violence. And yet, it's not the end, not entirely, because Alexandria keeps rising in our imagination. Burning, yes, but also glowing. It becomes the eternal symbol of what it means to love knowledge so much you'd risk your life for it, or your soul. You press a scroll back onto the shelf. It hums beneath your fingers. Did you know the library once tried to collect every book in the known world? Ships entering the harbor were searched, and any texts they carried were borrowed, copied, and sometimes never returned. A little piratical, a little seductive, a bit like stealing kisses you swear were accidental. Even Cleopatra herself, history's favorite seductress, was a student of the library. She spoke several languages, read philosophy, conducted chemistry experiments, and somehow that's never what gets mentioned first. You step into one of the lecture rooms, circular, candlelit, almost cozy. You imagine sitting cross-legged on a cushion, parchment in hand, listening to a Syrian mathematician explain the concept of zero while a cat curls around his ankles. Outside, the empire changes hands. But in here, time slows. And that's the thing, isn't it? These minds, these ancient minds, they weren't trying to conquer land. They were trying to conquer uncertainty. And that, oddly enough, made them more dangerous than any general. Because knowledge doesn't stay still. It spreads. Whispers into the ears of the wrong people, lights small rebellions, opens forbidden doors. The great library didn't fall just because of war. It fell because people were afraid of what happens when too many others start asking why instead of how much, when too many girls start reading, when slaves learn astronomy, when old myths start sounding like bedtime stories instead of commandments. You lean back against a warm marble pillar. You hear the crackle of flame, but you're not afraid. Not yet. It's soft, distant, almost like applause. There's a myth that one scroll from Alexandria still exists, hidden, passed hand to hand for centuries. Ink fading but not forgotten. Some say it holds secrets about lost civilizations. Others say it's just a grocery list. You decide which is scarier. Before you leave, you look over your shoulder one last time. Smoke is rising. You want to shout, "Save the books." But you know they were never just paper. They were people, questions, promises, kisses that never landed, warnings whispered in ink. And now they live in your memory. Smudged, yes, but still warm. You walk away from the ashes of Alexandria, your fingertips still tingling with static from scrolls long gone. The road ahead smells of dust and citrus, winding through groves that echo with ancient conversations. And there, beneath a fig tree, a man waits for you. Barefoot, bearded, eyes bright with mischief and melancholy. His name is Socrates, and he talks too much. You sit with him in the Athenian sun, pretending to sip your wine, but he doesn't drink much. He's too busy poking holes in reality. What is justice? He asks you, smiling like he already knows you're going to trip over your answer. What is love? What is truth? He leans closer. What is you? You answer carefully, because in this city, words can kill. Socrates, you realize, is more dangerous than a sword, because he doesn't give answers. He gives questions. Big, messy, uncomfortable questions. And people don't like those. Especially not powerful people. Especially not the ones whose lives depend on no one looking behind the curtain. The problem with Socrates is that he's too good at unraveling certainty. And in post-war Athens, where democracy limps and egos run high, his brand of wisdom feels less like philosophy and more like sabotage. He's not just a thinker. He's an uninvited therapist at the world's worst dinner party. Historians still argue whether Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth or for embarrassing the elders. Spoiler, it's probably both. You stand beside him in the trial chamber, where wood creaks and the crowd buzzes with preemptive regret. He's found guilty, of course, not of violence, not of theft, but of thought, the kind that plants seeds and waits for them to bloom into rebellion. And then comes the cup. Hemlock, cold, bitter, slow. You imagine lifting it. Would you drink? Would you run? He doesn't. Not Socrates. He talks through his own death, calmly, as if dying for a principle is just another Tuesday. The poison works its way up. First the feet, then the legs, finally the heart. His friends cry. He consoles them. Even in death, he's the teacher. And suddenly, you understand. Some people are so dangerous, you have to kill them just to shut them up. But here's the thing. It didn't work, because Plato was watching. Wide-eyed, heartbroken, and probably scribbling every word. That grief became legacy. That silence became a library. Socrates lived, not in body but in syllables. And now, in your ears, you rise and walk away from Athens. But something follows, the echo of a question, one you can't forget, one that stays with you. What do you know? That might one day get you in trouble. You laugh quietly, a little uneasy, because now you see the pattern. Real education, not memorizing facts, but truly waking up, is almost always a little dangerous, or at the very least, inconvenient. Let's step into another scene, a dinner gathering. Less wine, more parchment. Welcome to the Roman Empire. Vast, grand, and deeply insecure. They loved philosophers until they didn't. Take Seneca, for example, a Stoic, brilliant, an advisor to emperors, too brilliant perhaps. Emperor Nero once admired him, until Seneca's writings began to cut too deep, too pointed, too personal. Like maybe he was hinting that someone in the palace had lost their mind. And just like that, it was over. A quiet, elegant execution. They called it honor, a forced suicide, a final letter, a graceful farewell. Yes, that really happened. In Rome, you weren't simply executed. You were invited to end yourself, politely, with dignity, maybe even with poetry. You walk the cold marble halls of the palace. The ghosts are still there, etched into the stone. How many thinkers smiled through their farewells just to protect those who would read their last words? Here's something strange. Some Roman scholars hid dangerous ideas inside poems, symbols, even stories about fish. Historians still debate whether a famous treatise on fishing was actually a secret call to rebellion. Up to you. You sit now beneath a Roman archway, gazing at a mosaic of Medusa. Her eyes never blink, but they see everything. Always have. And from somewhere far off, a voice reaches you. the unexamined life is not worth living. And you wonder, was he right? Or was he simply doomed? The sunlight fades. The air is warm with dust and something sweet. Your eyelids begin to fall. You lean back against the cool stone. Silence gathers, the kind that comes after someone dies for saying too much. And once again, the whisper returns, soft like breath against your ear. What do you believe? That could make someone afraid. You wake with the rustle of vellum and the soft flicker of candlelight. The sun has disappeared behind stained glass, and now you walk barefoot through corridors of cold stone and silent judgment. The Middle Ages, where thinking too much could get you branded or burned. You're in a monastery now. Rows of robed figures bend over manuscripts, quills scratching in rhythm like rain on a wooden roof. This place smells like beeswax, mildew, and secrecy. It's peaceful, until it isn't. Welcome to the scriptorium, the medieval Xerox machine with a moral compass. Copying books is holy work, but don't mistake that for freedom. The monks don't write their own thoughts. No, they replicate scripture, commentaries, saint-approved doctrine. Anything more curious than that? Dangerous. You peer over a shoulder. A monk is illuminating the letter A with gold leaf and a tiny dragon. Beautiful, but safe. Dragons, after all, are easier to explain than original ideas. You reach for a half-hidden manuscript. It's not on the approved list. The title? On the Movement of the Stars. You feel the air shift. That's astronomy. Pagan stuff. Possibly Islamic. Possibly heretical. Your hands tingle like you're touching something alive. Something you're not supposed to understand. The monk beside you pauses. His quill stills. His eyes flick sideways. And just like that, you've crossed a line. Here's the thing. The medieval church didn't fear sin as much as it feared disruption. And knowledge was disruptive. One misunderstood text could undo an entire worldview. Or worse, encourage others to start asking questions. Historians still argue whether certain lost texts were really lost, or just quietly buried beneath layers of silence and shame. You walk down the cloister now, robes brushing your ankles. A bell tolls in the distance. Time for prayer. But you can't stop thinking about that book, about the monk who copied it in secret. Maybe he read it under candlelight, heart racing, ears tuned for footsteps. Maybe he translated it in code, substituting words like light for God and orbit for divine order. Maybe he whispered its meaning to a trusted friend or a lover. Because yes, even monks fall in love, sometimes with people, sometimes with ideas. You pass through the gardens, where herbs grow in tidy rows. Lavender, thyme, hemlock, one for sleep, one for soup, one for silence. Did you know that some herbal manuals were banned by the church for being too close to witchcraft? Recipes for healing, viewed as threats, especially if they came from women, especially if they worked. And there it is again. The rule hidden beneath all these rules. If the knowledge doesn't come from the right source, it must be evil. You pause at a wooden door, worn smooth by centuries of fingertips. On the other side, a room of young novices chant scripture. You press your ear to the wood. The Latin sounds like music, but not your kind. It's repetition, not exploration. It doesn't want answers, just obedience. You wonder how many of them feel the pull, the ache, that gnawing desire to know more than they're told, to peek into a different book, to write their own. But books are chained here, literally. Iron links fastened to heavy tables, as if the knowledge might escape if left alone too long. And here's a fringe tidbit. There were book curses in the Middle Ages, handwritten threats at the start or end of a manuscript, curses promising blindness, madness, or even eternal damnation for anyone who stole or tampered with the sacred text. You read one in a dream once. Whoever steals this book, may he die the death, may he be fried in a pan, may the falling sickness and fever seize him. Charming. You climb a spiral staircase now, torch in hand. The steps creak with secrets. You reach the top, where a single manuscript rests on a pedestal beneath a vaulted ceiling. This one's different. It's not chained. It's not cursed. But it is watching you. You open it. The pages shimmer with something that feels older than language. Symbols. Notes in the margins. A love letter? A warning? You can't tell. And maybe that's the point. You sit in the flickering candlelight, the whole monastery breathing below you. For a moment, you're not just reading history, you're inside it. You understand the monk who dared to write what wasn't allowed, the woman who hid her herbal wisdom in fairy tales, the student who memorized a banned passage in case the book was burned. You understand what it costs to know more than you're allowed, and you start to realize education in the Middle Ages wasn't about facts. It was about who controlled the story, who got to speak, who got to listen, and who got to burn. The flame beside you flutters suddenly. Maybe it's wind, or maybe it's something older. A sigh from the manuscript itself, grateful to be touched again. You close the book gently. The stairs groan beneath your feet as you descend. But something follows you. Not a ghost exactly, just a truth. That even in places meant to preserve knowledge, curiosity has always needed to wear a disguise. Outside the monastery, the wind changes. You feel it. Cool, charged like breath before a secret is spoken. The road is narrower now, lined with hedges and suspicion. You're not in Rome anymore. You're not safe anymore. Welcome to the age of heretics. You walk through a village just before dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys. Children chase each other past wells. But the tension here is thicker than stew. People glance sideways. Doors shut quickly. And in the center of town, a wooden platform waits quietly, surrounded by kindling. Someone always knows too much. You hear it in whispered confessions, in the rustle of papers tucked into aprons, in the way the priest pauses when someone mentions the stars. Because in this world, thinking isn't just dangerous, it's treasonous. You step into a stone church, candlelit and echoing. A sermon is underway. You sit in the back. The priest's voice rises with fire and fear. Beware false teachers, for they walk among us with serpent tongues. Someone gasps. Someone else crosses themselves. And you? You think of that old book in the tower, the one that talked about the earth not being the center of the universe. Oops. You leave the church quietly and follow a trail of murmurs to a cottage on the edge of town. Inside, a woman, mid-30s, sharp eyes, hands ink-stained. She doesn't look dangerous. She looks like someone who reads before bed and forgets to eat dinner. But on the table before her are open books, banned ones. She smiles at you. Want to know a secret? She asks. You do. She talks about the movement of the planets, about medicine not found in scripture, about why thunder isn't the wrath of saints. And suddenly, you're not in a cottage. You're in a library with a heartbeat. But this knowledge is outlawed, even if it's true, especially if it's true. You glance toward the window. A figure moves past it, slowly. deliberately. This woman? She's a heretic, not because she's evil, but because she dared to think outside the sacred outline. That's enough. Historians still argue whether most heresy trials were truly about theology, or if they were about power, politics, patriarchy. Sometimes a woman knowing how to read was reason enough. Did you know the Inquisition kept files like a modern surveillance agency? Indexes of dangerous books, profiles of suspicious thinkers, an early form of intellectual blacklisting, long before email, longer before hashtags. You help the woman gather the books into a secret panel beneath the floorboards. You don't speak. You don't need to. The air is full of mutual understanding and smoke. Because out in the square, someone else is not so lucky. You stand at the edge of the crowd. A man, robed and trembling, is tied to a stake. His crime? Writing a treatise that said the body of Christ was symbolic, not literal. A theological detail, yes, but one that unraveled a 1,000-year-old ritual. He doesn't scream. He recites. His last words are from the Psalms. And you realize his memory will survive longer than the ashes in the air. You walk away choking a little on smoke, on silence, on something older. The road leads you into a quiet garden, a hidden place, a whispering one. You sit beneath an olive tree and suddenly remember that many of these heretics had entire networks, secret codes, messenger pigeons, poems that were also instructions, recipes that hid chemistry formulas, fairy tales that disguised philosophical manifestos. A fringe tidbit? Some heretical texts were bound in plain covers, disguised as cookbooks or prayer manuals. A visitor might see "on lentils on the spine" and never know it contained a blueprint for rebellion. You brush your hand along the dirt. How many of these books were buried during raids? How many teachers vanished in the night, leaving behind only strange notebooks and frightened pupils? You imagine being one of them, teaching in whispers, waiting for footsteps, knowing that every question could be your last, and still teaching. You understand now that heresy was rarely about hell. It was about threats. A new idea is a crack in the wall. Let enough of them in, and the whole cathedral shakes. You lie back in the grass. The stars come out. They look different now. Not like holes in the dome of heaven, but like destinations. Places you might one day name, if you survive long enough to study them. You whisper a question to the sky, not because you expect an answer, but because asking feels like defiance, like prayer with teeth. The stars above you flicker like candle wicks. The grass beneath is damp and chill, but your mind is warm, buzzing, with questions, with awe, with danger. You rise, brushing dew from your sleeves, and follow a path that winds east, deeper into time. Stone walls give way to domed towers. Cloisters melt into cluttered labs. The scent changes too, from incense and ash to sulfur and something sweet, almost floral. You're entering the strange, smoky world of alchemy. You duck under a low wooden beam and into a dim room glowing with flame. Glass vessels gurgle. Copper wires twitch like nerves. A bearded man with wide eyes and permanently ink-stained fingers mutters to himself in 4 languages. He doesn't notice you. He's too busy chasing transformation. Gold from lead. Elixir of life. Panacea. Philosopher's stone. These weren't just metaphors. They were obsessions. Lifelong ones. You peek at his notes. Chicken scratches and Latin incantations mixed with diagrams that resemble constellations and clockwork. His handwriting pulses with longing, not just for wealth, but for immortality. And here's the secret. Half the alchemists weren't really after gold. They were after truth, or purity, or some version of divinity buried beneath science, faith, and mystery. That's what made them dangerous, especially when they started succeeding. You watch him drip something purple into a crucible. It hisses, then quiets. He whispers a spell, or a formula, or a prayer, and somewhere deep inside you, something shivers. Historians still argue whether alchemy was proto-science or spiritual metaphor, but either way, it had a body count, because the church didn't like it, nor did kings, and certainly not the neighbors, who assumed that anyone who made weird smells and didn't attend mass was up to no good. One wrong reaction, one suspicious explosion, and suddenly, you're not a scholar, you're a sorcerer. You hear footsteps on cobblestone, torches, angry voices. The alchemist freezes. You hide with him behind a curtain, heart pounding. A scroll falls from a desk, and your eye catches a strange footnote. Truth is not found, it is boiled. He smiles at you, finally noticing you're there. Want to see something forbidden? He whispers. Of course you do. He leads you into a back room. Notebooks line the walls, some bound in velvet, others in patched leather. One of them glows faintly. Another pulses like a heartbeat. And there in the center, a vial of mercury sways in its cradle like a cradle. Alchemy is physical. It's sensual. It's alive. A dance between math and magic. And that's precisely why it terrified the authorities. Because these thinkers weren't just decoding nature, they were rebuilding it, challenging the idea that creation belonged to gods alone. You sit at the bench beside him and dip a quill in red ink. He guides your hand. Together you draw a symbol. 1 part star, 1 part snake, 1 part something older. You don't know what it means, but you feel it hum in your blood. A fringe tidbit? Many alchemists encoded their research in symbols that only other adepts could interpret. A lion devouring the sun might mean a chemical reaction. A queen holding a severed head, possibly mercury sublimation, or heartbreak, or both. You hear a knock on the wooden door. He pauses. Eyes dart to the hidden trapdoor beneath the rug. He whispers, "You can't be found here." You slip into the darkness, heart racing. Below in the cellar, old manuscripts are piled like bones. Some are scorched. Others sing, softly, in voices you don't recognize. And there, written on the wall in gold dust, one sentence. To know is to risk becoming more than human. You breathe it in. You believe it. Later, when the shouting has passed and the alchemist lets you back up, the lab is quieter. He looks tired, but defiant. Most of us, he says, don't die from explosions. We die from silence, or fire, or poison slipped in our wine. And he smiles again, wryly, like someone who's already halfway immortal. You thank him. You leave with a vial in your pocket and something strange in your eyes. A new way of seeing, a hunger. You're walking under moonlight now, passing others like him. Faces half lit, hands stained with elements and ideas. Some will vanish. Some will be celebrated centuries too late. Some will burn. But all of them believed that truth wasn't just something to know. It was something to touch, to kiss, to drink. You stop beneath an arch where someone's carved a symbol into the stone. You recognize it now. It means transformation. It means danger. It means you're beginning to understand. You follow the moonlight east again, past the scent of sulfur and scroll dust, until the road straightens and widens, paved now, deliberate, imperial. The air feels colder, but clearer. Stars wheel overhead in slow ceremony. And far off in the distance, a lone tower cuts the night. You're in Italy now. Renaissance Italy. But the mood isn't festive. No carnival, no violins, just tension, heavy as cathedral doors. Because tonight, someone is looking too closely at the heavens. You slip quietly through a doorway and into a small, cluttered room. A telescope stretches out the window like an arm reaching for God. Charts, maps, and sketches blanket every surface. You run your hand over a diagram of the solar system, sun in the center, planets spinning like dancers. This is Galileo's house, and he's not sleeping. He mutters to himself as he scribbles notes in the margins of a book titled Sidereus Nuncius, the Starry Messenger, a bold name for bold ideas. He's seen things through that telescope no one wants to hear about. Moons orbiting Jupiter, craters on the moon, imperfections on what was supposed to be perfect. You glance through the eyepiece. It's like peeking into forbidden territory. Not hell, but something far more unsettling. Truth. And truth, especially when inconvenient, has a long history of making people nervous. Historians still argue whether Galileo's real crime was science or arrogance. Because yes, he saw the stars, but he also spoke too freely, published too widely, mocked too playfully, especially when addressing those who wore robes, not lab coats. You step into the audience hall of the Inquisition now. Marble, candles, eyes that don't blink, and there he stands, the stargazer, older than you'd imagined. Tired, but not broken. He's offered a choice, renounce his findings or face torture. He pauses. Then he bows his head and murmurs a line, and yet it moves. The earth. Around the sun, a whispered rebellion tucked behind teeth. You follow him back to house arrest. It's not a dungeon, it's a villa, but it may as well be a cell. His books are censored, his telescope forbidden, his letters intercepted, and yet he writes, in secret, through coded notes, through protégés, through long silent glances at the stars. A fringe tidbit. Galileo's daughter, Maria Celeste, a cloistered nun, smuggled letters, books, and even herbal remedies to him while he was imprisoned. She may have been his most loyal accomplice, and possibly the only person who ever truly understood him. You sit in his garden, where citrus trees grow and the stars still shine. He joins you, not to speak, but to look, up, always up. He traces constellations with his finger, and you imagine what it's like to know something so deeply, so certainly, that no prison, no trial, no fire can unknow it. You whisper, "Why did they fear you?" He doesn't answer. He just smiles, as if the stars have already answered for him. You walk away slowly, carrying the image of the telescope in your mind like a secret weapon. And then, unexpectedly, you're at a party. A salon in Paris. Velvet chairs, lace gloves, perfume so thick it replaces air. The Enlightenment has arrived, powdered and powdered again. You sip wine. You eavesdrop. The thinkers here speak in metaphors, in satire, in careful wordplay. Because even in this age of reason, saying the wrong thing, even lightly, even laughing, can land you in exile, or prison, or worse, publicly corrected by someone with more followers and a sharper pen. You meet a woman near the fireplace. Her eyes sparkle. Her fan flutters. She's a mathematician, a philosopher, and she knows more than half the room, but says less. Because for her, knowledge is not a shield. It's a spotlight. She speaks with grace, hints, glances, as if brilliance must be camouflaged to survive. And she's not wrong. Even now, there are whisper networks, secret meetings, manuscripts passed beneath the table. Enlightenment thinkers may be louder than monks, but their echo chambers still crack. You lean back against a chaise. Someone recites Voltaire. Someone else quotes Rousseau. The room hums with contradictions and silk. You think of Galileo again, of stars that move, of minds that don't stop even when their mouths are forced shut. And in that salon, beneath the perfume and lace, you feel the same danger. That knowledge, when handled too boldly, still burns. Just more politely now. You slip out of the salon just before dawn. The air is sharp with morning, tinged with fire smoke and something sweeter. Revolution, maybe. Or perfume. Hard to tell in Paris. You cross damp cobblestones, heart still drumming with wine and Voltaire. The Enlightenment is blooming, sure, but even flowers can grow fangs. Because this age of ideas, it plays favorites, especially when the thinker wears a corset. You enter another salon, this one quieter, dimmer. No powdered wigs here, just sharp women with sharper minds. Lace gloves resting on scientific manuscripts, a flute playing softly in the corner, barely audible over a spirited debate about Rousseau's hypocrisy. These are the salonières, women who hosted, led, and shaped the great conversations of their time. But history rarely gives them top billing. Too dangerous, too brilliant, too unwilling to stay in the margins. You sit beside one. She's writing, furiously, elegantly, a treatise on ethics and logic. Her quill drips red ink. A coincidence? Probably. But it stains the paper like a promise. She tells you about Émilie du Châtelet, the woman who translated Newton's Principia into French. Not just translating, but explaining it better than some of the men who first read it. She corrected equations in between childbirths and lightning storms, died young, but left behind equations that still baffle freshmen. Historians still argue whether du Châtelet's work influenced later Enlightenment physics, or was simply erased by the men she once corrected. You can guess. Your host leans closer. Smart women, she whispers, don't last long if they're obvious about it. You stay a little longer, listening to them debate theology and astronomy with the same tone they might use to discuss embroidery. Camouflage, darling. Camouflage. But not everyone played coy. You turn a corner and bump straight into Olympe de Gouges, playwright, activist, sharp-tongued truth-teller. She looks you up and down like she's weighing your soul. Then she recites the opening line of her Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. Woman is born free and remains equal to man in rights, bold, daring, and deeply unpopular. Because in revolutionary France, even the guillotine has a sense of irony. You can speak for liberty, fraternity, and equality. Just don't ask what happened to sorority. Olympe ends up executed for being too loud, too persistent, too eloquent about things people didn't want to fix. You stand by the scaffold later that night, not out of morbid curiosity, but because you can't stop wondering how many books, how many voices, how many truths have been cut short just before they could finish their final sentence. And still, the women keep speaking. Some, like Mary Wollstonecraft, cross oceans with pens sharper than most swords. Others disguise their writing under male names. George Eliot, Currer Bell. Silence has always had an editor's hand. You walk along the Seine, its waters gleaming with dawn. A fringe tidbit floats to mind. In some salons, women used coded fans. Yes, fans. To communicate ideas too dangerous to speak aloud. One flutter meant agree. Two meant speak slower. 3 meant stop before someone hears. Imagine debating Rousseau with your wrist. You sit on a bench near a statue. A man, of course. No plaque for the woman who inspired him. But you can feel her here, in the hush, in the breeze lifting the hem of your thoughts. Because women didn't just participate in the Enlightenment, they shaped it. Quietly, fiercely, between tea and treason. But the smarter they were, the more carefully they had to step. One wrong word, scandal. One too clever essay, censorship. One too public opinion, exile. You start to notice a pattern. Even in eras where thought was celebrated, education, real, sharp, disruptive education, was still a double-edged sword, especially if it came from the wrong mouth. You trace your fingers along the cool stone of the bench. You think of the woman with the red ink, the fan signals, the ones who whispered philosophy while pretending to gossip, and the ones who didn't pretend at all, and paid the price. And you wonder, how much brilliance is still hidden in journals beneath floorboards, in pseudonyms? In the footnotes men never read? The sun rises, the bells of Paris toll, the city wakes. But you're still listening, for voices that were nearly lost, for words that dared to sound like freedom. You leave the salons behind, but their whispers follow you like perfume on silk. The scent of ideas lingers even as the path narrows, cobblestones giving way to gravel. You cross the border without noticing. The language softens, then sharpens again. You've arrived at the edge of exile. A carriage waits on the road ahead. Velvet curtains, heavy wheels, and a single passenger. Voltaire. Thin, sharp-nosed, with eyes like lightning dressed in lace. He welcomes you with a nod, as if he's been expecting you. He's always on the move. Too witty to stay in one place. Too dangerous to leave alone. Voltaire's weapons are paper and wit. His letters travel faster than carriages, and each one carries a wink of truth, a slap of sarcasm, and often a death wish. He invites you to ride with him, and of course you do. Inside the carriage, manuscripts rattle in secret compartments. Some are plays, others pamphlets, all of them sharp enough to cut through hypocrisy like butter on brioche. He reads you a line, soft and slow. It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. You feel that one in your spine. Voltaire wasn't just clever. He was bold. He mocked kings, criticized priests, defended exiled philosophers and imprisoned printers. He turned common sense into comedy and then weaponized it. But brilliance breeds enemies. He was imprisoned in the Bastille twice, banished from Paris more times than you can count on powdered fingers. Still, he kept writing. From Switzerland, from Prussia, from secret cottages and borrowed salons, always one step ahead of the consequences. Historians still argue whether Voltaire's exile was punishment or strategy. Some say he courted banishment, used it as insulation to keep writing freely. Others say it broke him in small, clever pieces. But either way, he wrote, and wrote, and wrote. You sip wine from a silver flask he hands you. It tastes like rebellion, with a hint of raisins. He tells you about Candide, the tale of a cheerful optimist pummeled by reality until he learns to cultivate his garden. A fable, yes, but also a middle finger wrapped in fiction. Satire, after all, is just the truth in a nicer coat. He hands you a quill. Write something, he says. Something true. Something they'll hate. You hesitate. He smiles. If it's safe, it's probably useless. Later, you arrive at his estate in Ferney, more fortress than farmhouse. Here in the French countryside, Voltaire built a sanctuary for exiles, thinkers, and anyone brave enough to think in italics. He shows you a guest room. The bed is soft. The books, not so much. You notice a shelf labeled Dangerous. It contains texts banned in Paris, burned in Berlin, and whispered in Vienna. You run your fingers along the spines. One crackles. He chuckles. That one got me sued. Twice. There's a fringe tidbit about Voltaire most people miss. He secretly funded the printing of banned books all across Europe. He paid for presses, paid for smuggling routes, even bribed border agents. All so that words could slip into the hands of people who weren't supposed to read them. And here's the delicious irony. Many of those books claimed to uphold reason and truth and secular morality. While being utterly illegal, you lie in bed that night, infernal, beneath a ceiling painted with stars, not because Voltaire was an astronomer, but because he knew how important it was to look up, especially when the world wanted you to look down. A knock at the door. A messenger hands you a note. They've banned 3 more pamphlets. One of them might be yours. You smile, heart fluttering. It's working. You wake before dawn. Voltaire is already at his desk writing. He doesn't look at you, but says, "You can't kill an idea once it's made someone laugh." You step outside into the garden. The air smells of ink and roses. A woman is reciting lines from his plays to a small group of students. The words hang like fireworks, ready to explode in someone else's mind. You understand now. Exile is only exile if you let them keep your voice. Voltaire didn't go quiet. He got louder. Softer, yes, but cleverer. And his words, smuggled like jewels, reached farther than he ever could. And you, lucky you, got to ride along. You leave Fernie just as the sun crests over the treetops, warm light splashing against ink-stained shutters. You carry nothing but a quote in your chest. If it's safe, it's probably useless. It hums inside you like a little secret revolution. But this next road, it's louder, grittier. It smells of sweat, absinthe, and smoke. Not the soft kind from hearth fires, but the acrid smoke of cannon blasts and burning pamphlets. You're walking straight into the French Revolution. The salons are empty now. The powdered wigs are gone. In their place, red caps, cockades, calloused hands. Philosophy has spilled into the streets, and the guillotine is no longer symbolic. You arrive at a cafe. Crowded, loud, smells like spilled coffee and spilled hope. A man stands on a table shouting passages from Rousseau. He's missing a shoe, maybe a tooth. He's grinning like someone who's just discovered his voice and isn't giving it back. Everywhere people are reading, loudly, passionately, carelessly. You sit beside a young woman, her hair tied back with a threadbare ribbon. She's reading a hand-copied essay titled On the Social Contract and the Execution of Tyrants. Her finger traces each line slowly, lips barely moving. She looks up and says, "They say reading this makes you a traitor." You ask, "And?" She shrugs. "Then I suppose I'm guilty." She folds the paper into a square, tucks it into her boot, and stands. "Come on," she says. "We're late." You follow her through winding alleys and open squares. Posters hang like flayed skin from walls. Names of the condemned, the wanted, the recently vanished. You pass a man preaching revolution from the steps of a crumbling cathedral. He quotes Rousseau and Robespierre like scripture. His voice trembles with conviction or fear. It's hard to tell. You arrive at the Place de la Révolution. And there it is, the guillotine. Polished, efficient, utterly indifferent. It gleams in the sunlight like a cold god. Today it waits for a writer. You push through the crowd. The woman beside you whispers, "It's Camille Desmoulins." You recognize the name. Pamphleteer, lawyer, revolutionary, one of the first to stir the crowds with his pen, one of the first to demand change, and now, one more name on the list. His crime? Criticizing how the revolution was being run, because revolutions, once fed, get hungry. Camille walks toward the scaffold not like a martyr, but like a man who expected better from people who once quoted him in candlelit rooms. He looks out at the crowd. His mouth moves, but the drum roll swallows his words. You lean in, try to catch them. You don't. All you hear is the thump, and the silence after. Historians still argue whether Camille's final essays were warnings or betrayal, whether he believed the revolution had gone too far, or not far enough. But what's clear is this: the same words that lit the fire were now enough to burn him at the stake, or at least decapitate him efficiently in front of former admirers. Later, as the crowd disperses like smoke, you walk through empty boulevards. A man hands you a folded page, still wet with ink. It's an anonymous pamphlet, untitled, urgent, honest. And you wonder, how many writers, how many thinkers stood right where Camille did, knowing their next sentence could be their last? There's a fringe tidbit from this era you probably haven't heard. Some revolutionaries wrote with invisible ink, milk, lemon juice, even onion water, letters that revealed their contents only when heated by candlelight. Because not all executioners wore uniforms. Some wore smiles, some wore wigs. You sit on a park bench as the city breathes again. Birds chirp, dogs bark, the guillotine is cleaned, and still somewhere, someone writes. Because revolutions aren't started by violence, they're started by sentences. You remember Rousseau's words from the table shouter earlier. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. You wonder how many writers died believing they could loosen just one of those links, and how many readers picked up the chain and kept going. You look down at the pamphlet in your hands. Its final line reads, "If I must die, let it be for the truth I have touched." You fold it quietly, tuck it under your coat, and walk on. The revolution fades behind you like smoke caught in the folds of your coat. Not gone, just diffused, clinging to the fabric of memory. You cross the Atlantic now, not on the deck of a ship, but through the corridors of remembrance. The scent changes as you travel, from blood and ink to the sweet rot of cane sugar, the acrid tang of gunpowder, and the salted steam of sweat rising off sun-scorched skin. The road ahead is cracked, ruddy with iron-red dust, as if stained by centuries of effort and revolt. You have arrived in Saint-Domingue, what the world will one day call Haiti, but not yet. Now it is a colony carved from brutality, engineered for profit, soaked in silence and fire. Here, reading is not a pastime. It's not even education. Here, reading is treason. Reading is rebellion. You walk through endless sugar fields, beneath a sky so white and blinding, it feels carved from bone. The cane rustles not with wind, but with whispers. Whips crack in the distance like punctuation marks. Overseers bark numbers, not names. The people are cataloged, not called. And yet, they endure. Their bodies are bent, scarred, blistered. But their minds? Their minds are sharpened, like blades passed hand to hand. You can feel it. You can hear it. Not in words, but in rhythms. Coded songs echo in the distance. Drums speak in dialects banned by law. Prayers slip into poetry and back again, camouflaged beneath the veil of Catholic ritual. But if you listen closely, if you really listen, you realize they are not praying, they are planning. You meet a man near the edge of a field where the cane thins out and the jungle begins. He is tall, composed, skin like polished mahogany, hands like stone tablets carved by labor and time. His fingers curl around nothing, but you feel they once held reins, of horses, of ideas, of men. He speaks in a low voice, measured like scripture. There's no rush in him, only certainty. His name is Toussaint Louverture. You ask him how he learned to read. He smiles, a small, sly thing. From a Jesuit, he says, and from the wind. He pulls a book from the folds of his coat, a battered volume that's been read so many times its pages seem thinner than paper. A manual of military strategy. The corners are gone. The margins are dense with scribbles in French, in Creole, and in something older. A Creole of the spirit, a grammar born from drums and defiance. It's as if the book had passed through fire and survived, carrying both scars and wisdom. Toussaint read the words of Rousseau and Voltaire. He read of liberty, of equality, of fraternity, and, most dangerously, he believed them. That was his crime. You walk with him through a village stitched together by willpower and whispers. Women read aloud by the hearth, voices soft but steady. Children chant verses that rhyme like prayers, but teach like lectures. In this world, every lullaby is a lesson, every bedtime story a battle hymn. Under colonial law, all of this is illegal, because here in Saint-Domingue, the ruling class does not fear blades. They fear books. Education is treated like infection. Literacy is seen as contamination. A literate slave is a contagion with legs. But this virus, it doesn't destroy. It liberates. You sit beneath a gnarled banyan tree as Toussaint speaks of Rome, of Spartacus and his doomed revolt, of Caesar's cold brilliance, of Hannibal's long march through the Alps. He's not just a fighter. He's a philosopher in a soldier's coat, a strategist in a rebel's skin. He's read the Gospel and the Republic. He's studied both the Sermon on the Mount and Machiavelli. He speaks of justice the way one might speak of architecture, as something that must be built precisely and with vision. Historians will one day debate what shaped him more, the Church or the Enlightenment, Catholic ritual or revolutionary fire. But the truth is simpler. He took from both. Like a smith at a forge, he melted ideas into alloy and made something new. A strange but true detail. Before leading the revolt, he was imprisoned, not for violence, but for reading. A document outlawed by the colonial government, spoken aloud by a black man in a dark room. That same document later became part of his official justification to command an army. They thought they could silence him with a cell. Instead, they gave him a syllabus. Because this revolution, it wasn't spontaneous. It was studied. Page by page, you wander through makeshift camps nestled in the hills. They look like encampments, but they're really classrooms. A bonfire becomes a lecture hall. Men recite speeches by Rousseau and Diderot from memory. Women copy coded messages on scraps of linen. Children hide pages inside hollowed gourds. Whole libraries reduced to breath and candlelight. You see pages tucked into bread, stashed in boots, woven into hair. You see letters carried like relics across enemy lines. Not all battles are fought with muskets. Some are fought with verbs. Toussaint walks beside you to the crest of a hill. Smoke rises in the distance, the tremor before a clash. He points to the horizon, eyes calm, voice iron. They don't fear our guns, he says. They fear our ideas. They fear we read the word freedom and understood it was ours. Later, you sit beside a fire, watching a woman embroider a passage from the Declaration of the Rights of Man into the hem of her skirt. She works silently. Each stitch is an act of rebellion, each thread a hidden drumbeat of revolution. She's not just sewing, she's smuggling philosophy under the noses of tyrants. And you begin to understand, you're not witnessing war. You're witnessing literacy used as insurgency. You're watching philosophy passed hand to hand like contraband, and it's glorious. But revolutions, as history warns us, are never clean. Toussaint wins. He wins again and again. He crushes armies, outmaneuvers French generals. He signs treaties with empires and breaks chains with logic sharper than any blade. But still, they fear him. Because he doesn't just lead troops, he leads thinkers. Fighters who understand why they fight. And that is what terrifies tyrants the most. A population that can read their own condition and reject it. You walk with him one final time through a quiet garden. He knows what's coming. The betrayal, the trap, the long voyage to a freezing prison in France, where his body will fail before his will ever does. He looks up at the stars, calm, resolute, and says, "They can bury me, but not the words." And you believe him, because even now, centuries later, those words still burn. In whispered classrooms, in quiet songs, in textbooks that once refused to mention his name, you leave Saint-Domingue with red dust on your boots, pages in your pocket, and a fire you didn't know you carried, now lit behind your ribs. And you understand, sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is read out loud. You walk onward through a veil of fog and salt air, the sea once again murmuring at your back. But this voyage feels different. You're not alone. Not this time. Around you drift strange companions, half-formed thoughts, opium dreams, ink-stained fingers, dusty maps curled like old petals, scholars with trembling hands, and velvet-lined trunks, filled not with linens or coats, but with manuscripts wrapped in cloth like relics or corpses. You are stepping into the Victorian era. London breathes around you, heavy, gray, coal-lunged. The fog doesn't rise, it settles. In alleys, on windowsills, inside the folds of overcoats. The smoke here no longer comes from cannon fire. It curls from oil lamps, paraffin candles, pipe bowls, the slow smolder of intellect burning itself to ash. And from books, so many books, stacked to the ceilings, crammed into cabinets, shelved behind curtains. Books not merely read, consumed. You arrive at a townhouse in Bloomsbury, the kind with velvet curtains always drawn and minds always wide open. The kind of house where the lamps are lit all day and no one remembers to eat. Inside, it smells of tobacco, lemon polish, ink, and slow unraveling. This is the sanctuary of the Orientalists. Victorian scholars obsessed, no, possessed, by the idea of decoding the East, of prying open empires like ancient oysters and extracting meaning from their pearls and bones. Sanskrit, hieroglyphs, Confucian maxims, Vedic hymns. They study not to understand, but to own. The air is thick with perfume and mildew. Fossil collections line the mantelpiece. A stuffed owl watches from above a bookshelf. There is a mummy's hand on the piano. Conversation here isn't light. It's scorching. Ideas strike like flint and leave the room full of invisible fire. A man greets you in the foyer, pale, restless. Dark rings hang beneath his eyes like bruises earned from too many midnights. In one hand, he clutches a worn copy of the Bhagavad Gita. In the other, a vial of laudanum. He offers it like one might offer tea. You decline. Barely. He speaks in a low, hypnotic murmur, quotes Hafiz and Darwin in the same breath. He drifts from Persian love poetry to evolutionary biology without pause. His eyes are far away, watching stars through ancient geometry. He's trying to decode the universe, one stanza at a time. And you can tell, it's costing him. They're all like this, dreaming through maps, drowning in texts, living half in empire, half in myth. And here's the truth they won't say out loud. Most of this knowledge was not discovered. It was taken. Ripped from temples by torchlight, shipped in crates labeled curiosities, scrolls smuggled from burning monasteries, statues pulled from riverbeds like trophies. They call it scholarship. You can taste the theft in the air. Still, the texts sing. You hold a palm leaf manuscript from southern India, Tamil etched in ancient lines, each character delicate as a bone. You imagine the monk who pressed these letters into being, the rituals that encircled the recitation, the incense, the breath, the reverence. Now it sits here, mispronounced, misunderstood, smudged with foreign fingers. A fringe fact floats through the fog. Some of the first European translations of Eastern texts were so flawed, so wildly distorted, that entire new religions formed from the fragments. Pieces of Buddhism tangled with Christian mysticism, filtered through dreams and opium and empire. You walk through the British Museum, quiet as a tomb, colder even. Statues from Angkor Wat stand staring. Babylonian tablets rest behind glass like captured prisoners. Japanese scrolls curl beside Greek busts in a silence that feels unsettled. None of it belongs here, and yet all of it speaks. If you listen long enough, you meet a woman near the Egyptian gallery, pale, sharp-featured, ink on her cuffs. She's translating the Book of the Dead for a wealthy recluse who funds her work but never speaks. Her notebooks are a mess of margins, full of scratched-out translations, diagrams of tomb layouts, curses in red ink. She looks up and says, flatly, "Sometimes I think the dead don't want to be read." And yet, she reads them anyway, with reverence, with precision, with a kind of whispered defiance, and so do you. Back at the townhouse, night has fallen, but no one notices. The curtains remain drawn. You flip through a scholar's personal journal, a maze of half-thoughts and obsessions. There's a sketch of a ruined temple in Java, inked beside a half-written love poem to someone unnamed. Below that, a list of opium withdrawal symptoms, shaking, sweating, hallucinations. They all blur together. Faith, fever, and footnotes. Because the truth is, these Victorian intellectuals walked a blade's edge. Brilliant often. Broken always. Some saw too much. Some understood too much and collapsed. Some simply disappeared, swallowed by libraries and laudanum and loneliness. Historians still argue what happened to them. Was it the burden of knowledge? Or something deeper? A kind of identity collapse. The moment you realize that the more you know, the less you understand. Because there is a difference between studying a culture and stealing its soul. You sit at an old writing desk, your hand resting on a globe. It still labels India as colony. You trace the lines and think about all the names erased, the languages reclassified, the sacred texts translated not to preserve, but to possess, to break open and rename. And yet, amid the shadows, beauty gleams. There are moments when something real shone through. When a scholar wept at a Sufi metaphor, he finally understood. When a stolen scroll whispered something too true to distort. These were rare, but they mattered. You walk the gaslit streets of London now, fog swirling like a second skin, The air hums with quiet things. Typewriters clicking behind curtains, clocks ticking behind thick glass, scholars whispering to ghosts. In a narrow alley near a broken lamp, you find a notebook half soaked from the gutter. Inside, a quote from Confucius, a Greek epigram, and one final scribble. We read to escape, but the best books trap us in truth. You press it to your chest. You don't know who wrote it. Maybe no one does. Maybe everyone did. You keep it. You turn the corner and vanish into the mist, leaving behind the velvet-draped parlors, the fevered minds, the pilfered brilliance, because now it's time to meet those who read not to rule, but to survive. The fog thins as you move east, not the gentle kind, not London's dreamy mist that curls like memory and perfume. No, this fog bites. It stings the throat. It carries steel in its lungs and questions in its breath. You are in Russia now, late 19th century, then early 20th. Time doesn't walk here. It coils, loops back on itself like a noose. You try to trace a linear path, but every step slides sideways. The streets blur into snow and shadow. Truth is smuggled in whispers. Dates bleed like ink left out in the cold. You walk through St. Petersburg, once imperial, now watching itself. Snow cracks underfoot like glass. The silence here isn't absence, it's presence. It listens. Men in heavy coats speak without moving their mouths. Eyes glance too quickly, too often. Windows blink, curtains twitch. A breath too loud can become a record, a misplaced word, a cell. Welcome to the empire of forbidden readers. Welcome to the age of literary espionage. A man meets you near a bakery that sells nothing but smells. He says no words, just nods toward an alley. You follow. Down a staircase, into the earth, into a room without signs, without windows, lit only by oil lamps and a fierce kind of hope. The walls are lined with books, not leather-bound, not printed, not safe, handwritten, smuggled, stitched together with thread and tremor. The room smells of wool, ash, paraffin, and fear. This is samizdat, not a library, a rebellion bound in paper. Every shelf here could be a crime scene, every page a confession or a prophecy. People are copying quietly, carefully. Pages pass from hand to hand, not like gifts, like blood transfusions. One girl traces a sentence with a finger before transcribing it, as if trying to feel the heartbeat beneath the ink. A boy sharpens his pencil as if preparing a scalpel. You see Dostoevsky, Marx, Akhmatova, even Voltaire, even Pushkin, especially Pushkin, because in Russia, literature is sacred, and everything sacred must go underground. A woman passes you a small hand-bound volume, tied with kitchen twine. Inside, the kingdom of God is within you. Tolstoy, banned. She looks up at you with hollow eyes and says, softly, "It took me 2 winters, but now it's his again." That's the unspoken code here. If the state bans a book, the people rebuild it. If the state burns a text, someone memorizes it. Forever. A fringe detail nearly lost to time. Entire novels once banned by the regime, were carried in memory like relics, recited in kitchens, whispered between bunkmates in the gulag, muttered into pillows during searches. Sometimes a chapter lived in one man, a paragraph in another. Together, they were the archive. You sit by a samovar, the metal warm against the cold air. The tea hisses, a soft lifeline in a room without clocks. Across the table, a boy teaches his younger sister how to recite a forbidden poem by Anna Akhmatova. His fingers tap a rhythm into the wood. Not a lullaby. A cipher. The walls are thin, but the consequences are thick. Thicker than blood. Thicker than law. The Okrana, and later, the Cheka, the NKVD, the KGB. They weren't afraid of uprisings. They were afraid of ideas, not just shouted ones, whispered ones. Words that sank deep, words with roots, not just radicals, readers. Historians still debate it. Did the Russian Revolution rise from hunger or from prose? Because bullets kill the body. But books kill empires. You drift through the back room, stacks of poetry, political theory, forbidden translations from the French Enlightenment, scribbled manifestos, hand-copied satire that no one dares to laugh at in public, plays that could cost a life, and always, always, the scent of candle wax and ink, like a chapel, like a crime scene. You ask someone, why risk this? A girl with ink-stained fingers shrugs, not bitter, not afraid, just resolved, because silence is worse. Outside, the snow is heavier. Your coat feels weighted, not by fabric, but by paper. It's as if every copied page is tucked into your lining, each word a shard, each idea a loaded gun, without bullets, but just as lethal. You enter a small flat that smells of boiled cabbage, burning newsprint, and something colder. Betrayal. A book lies on the table. It shouldn't exist. It's Marx, or Solzhenitsyn, or a banned translation of Kafka. It doesn't matter which. The danger is the same. You meet a man here, middle-aged, thin, arrested 3 times. Once for distributing a poem. Once for copying a foreign essay. Once for owning a typewriter. He pours your tea and says with a kind of quiet laughter, the worst thing they ever did was teach us to read. Later you find yourself in a prison cell. Real, not imagined. Concrete floor, rusted bucket, cold air sharp as glass. You share the darkness with a woman who whispers into your ear all night. Not secrets, a novel from memory. Word for word, she recites it as if it were scripture. Her voice doesn't shake. She is the book now. She is the archive. You fall asleep to her voice, wake with lines etched into your mind like scars. There's an old story, maybe true, maybe just a legend, of a man in the gulag who wrote a forbidden poem with a splinter onto his own skin. He memorized it, then scraped the skin clean before inspection. They never found the poem, but it lived in someone else's mouth. It passed on like a myth that won't die. You walk through Red Square as it snows. The stones are slick with history. The Kremlin looms above, not like a building, but like an animal waiting to breathe. A man sells onions in silence. Another watches him, or watches you. You've learned by now, thought is danger. Memory is resistance. Paper is fire. You tuck a copied essay into your coat. You don't look at it. You feel it. The last line reads, "When the ink freezes, we write with fire." And in that moment, you understand this was never just about books. It was about breath. It was about survival. It still is. You leave the snow of Red Square behind, but not unchanged. Your boots are heavy now, not with snow. With words you were never meant to carry, sentences stitched into coat linings, verses humming beneath your breath, forbidden thoughts, smuggled like contraband, trailing behind you like ghosts. You drift west, then south. But this next destination isn't found on any map. It doesn't live in coordinates. It lives in curvature. It exists in a mind, in a theory, in a formula that bends the very language of reality. You step quietly into a nondescript patent office in Bern, Switzerland. No fanfare, no crowds, just dust, desks, and the soft rustle of paper. It feels like nothing, but something's happening here. Something enormous, Inside, a young man sits, hunched over a pile of patent files, filing inventions he did not create, under a name history will never forget. His hair is already beginning to fight gravity. His mind already has. He is scribbling equations in the margins of boredom, dreaming sideways through bureaucracy. His name? Albert Einstein? He looks up as you enter, not startled, not curious, just present, and somehow not. His gaze is calm but distant, like a ship already sailing years ahead, anchored only faintly in the now. You sit across from him. He nods politely, then slides a stack of papers across the table. A humble gesture. But what's in those pages will one day alter how we understand reality itself. You skim them. You don't grasp the math, not really, but the concept crackles. Time is not fixed. Light has no master. Reality bends. And with it, the old truths bend too. What you believe to be constant, space, time, motion, are not. They shift. They yield. They relate. The universe, once a clock, is now a song. You walk with Einstein through years that unfurl like coordinates warped by velocity. The theory of special relativity lands like thunder, soft and slow at first, then louder, faster, undeniable. Some cheer, some recoil, because when the laws of the cosmos no longer obey your assumptions, what else might collapse? Historians still argue, was Einstein's exile inevitable or chosen? Did the world reject him, or did he reject it? Yes, he was a physicist, but also a Jew, a pacifist, a critic of militarism, nationalism, of power used carelessly. He believed in light and was branded dangerous because once Hitler rose to power, truth itself became suspect. You follow Einstein across the sea, not as a scientist now, but as a refugee, a fugitive of thought, to Princeton, to exile, to reluctant safety. He lectures in wool suits that hang a little loose. He walks slowly. His German accent sounds like homesickness. He misses Europe, misses the books in his mother tongue, misses the rhythm of a life before suspicion. But he does not miss the fear. Because back in Germany, the burning has begun. Not cities, books, ideas, minds, memories, language itself put to flame. You stand with Einstein on a dock, watching crates being lifted onto ships. Not food, not weapons, but manuscripts, letters, banned names on fading paper. These were the minds that built the scaffolding of civilization, now declared degenerate. You remember Berlin, 1933. Students, tossing volumes into fire. Freud, Kafka, Brecht, Einstein. Books turned to ash while the orchestra played. You ask him how it felt. He shrugs. The corner of his mouth turns. Not quite a smile. They can burn the books, he says. They can't burn the laws of physics. But you hear the tremor beneath the joke. Because they tried. They really tried. A lesser-known truth. Some within the Nazi regime tried to Aryanize physics, to recast relativity as Jewish science, to replace it with ideologically clean nationalist equations. They even attempted a version of quantum theory stripped of the names who birthed it. But reality, it turns out, doesn't care for purity. Still, the damage lingered in institutions, in language, in silence. You sit with him at his desk in Princeton. The shelves are cluttered, but not chaotic. There's a violin in the corner, a pipe resting on an open book, a letter on the table, unopened. He tells you in a soft voice about writing to FDR, about warning him of nuclear research, of what might happen if others discovered atomic power first. He regrets it. He doesn't say so directly, but you feel it in the space between sentences. Knowledge, he says, once released, doesn't ask permission. You sip tea. It tastes of dust and wool and years that never quieted. He shows you another letter, this one never sent. It speaks of exile, of being too curious, too unwilling to lie for comfort. It ends with this line, I do not fear ignorance. I fear those who worship it. You understand now that Einstein didn't flee just for survival. He fled for the freedom to think. But even in safety, the eyes followed. The man who redefined time itself was watched, surveilled. His name filled pages in FBI files, thousands of them. He was a threat, not because of what he built, but because he refused to bow. A fringe detail, in 1952, Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel. He declined, not because he didn't care, but because he did. He believed ideas should live in equations and essays, not in speeches and borders. He feared power misapplied more than he feared being forgotten. You walk with him one last time. A spring day, trees heavy with white blossoms. He talks about light, about atoms, about Mozart. He speaks as if everything, even the silence, hums with meaning. Everything is connected, he says, even silence. You feel that in your bones, because silence, too, can be a kind of resistance, a space where thought is protected, a breath before the equation. You leave the garden. You leave the scattered papers and chalk-dusted coats. But something in you is different now. Your internal compass has warped, bent slightly, like starlight near gravity. You've seen what happens when knowledge becomes radioactive, not just in science, but in spirit, in society, in soul. And now you wonder, if truth bends like light, what does it reveal in the cracks? You follow the curve of history like a comet slingshotting around the sun, from exile to embers, from theory to fire. Because now we're entering the smoke. You arrive in Germany, 1933. Not the Germany of castles and cathedrals, but one teetering on the edge of darkness. Banners stretch from windows like red tongues. Marching boots drown out the laughter of cafes. The air is laced with fear, sharp and antiseptic. You walk through Berlin, past the University of Humboldt. You hear shouting ahead. Crackling. Not a riot. Not yet. Just students. Proud. Crisp. Burning. Books. You push through the crowd, heart stammering. A pile of volumes rises in the center of the square like a funeral pyre. Flames curl around titles. Freud, Mann, Remarque, Kafka, Einstein, even Helen Keller. She was blind, deaf, and still too dangerous. Because what burns fastest isn't paper, it's ideas. A voice on the loudspeaker calls it an action against the un-German spirit, a tidy phrase for a dirty deed. You stand there, heat on your face, thinking, they're not burning books, they're burning questions. And someone nearby whispers the same. You turn to see a young man, thin, nervous. He presses a tattered copy of All Quiet on the Western Front into your hands and says, hide it. Then he vanishes. The pages are warm, smell of smoke, but the words inside are intact. You leave the square quickly, duck into a bookstore that looks closed but isn't. Inside, behind the poetry shelf, there's a trap door, and below it, a secret library. Dim, dusty, sacred. People sit cross-legged, reading in whispers. One woman teaches children from a banned textbook. Another translates Hemingway by candlelight. They all look up as you enter. No one smiles. Not here. But no one looks away either. You stay for a while. Read aloud, the heat of the fire above still tingling in your throat. Historians still argue whether the Nazi book burnings were symbolic or strategic. But here's what you know now. Symbolism is strategy. Because when you control what people read, you control what they dream. and what they fear. You walk deeper into Germany's shadow. The censorship grows louder. Radios crackle with propaganda. Newspapers print only what's allowed. Children memorize lines that aren't poems. Teachers erase names from reading lists like wounds from a photo. A fringe tidbit: Hitler's regime banned over 4,000 authors, not just Jews or communists, but feminists, pacifists, anyone whose words suggested softness, doubt, or joy without permission. You visit a classroom. The children recite from a new textbook. Short sentences. Harsh, simple. You feel something missing. The color, the metaphor, the wonder. Afterward, one girl passes you a note, folded and fluttering. Inside, a poem. Not from Goethe, not from the new syllabus, but from her grandmother copied from memory. A mind is a flame, not a mirror. You keep it. Later in Munich, you slip into a backroom gathering, the White Rose Society, students, intellectuals, risking everything to write and distribute anti-Nazi leaflets. Their manifesto doesn't call for war. It calls for conscience. You help fold the pages, help print. You're told not to use your name. Don't look anyone in the eye too long. If caught, pretend to be confused. But the truth is clear. These are not warriors. These are readers who refuse to forget how to think. You leave Germany on foot. The border behind you, nothing more than a line of fear. But what you carry now, tucked into your coat, sewn into your collar, hidden in your shoes, are the words they try to destroy. They'll survive, because books don't burn quietly, and readers don't forget. You pass a wall before crossing the final hill. Someone has carved a phrase into the stone, just under the frost line. Where they burn books, they will also burn people. It was said before the fire started. It was ignored. You touch the letters, cold, sharp, familiar. You think about all the words that will never be read again, and all the ones that survived anyway. Because flames can destroy pages, but not memory, not you. You cross into another continent now, not by ship, not by plane, not even by dream, but by vibration. A low, heavy hum that fills your chest before your feet ever touch soil. It's not music, it's not language, it's something deeper, a pressure, a silence that isn't quiet, just controlled. You are in South Africa, and it is the age of apartheid. Not the South Africa of tourist brochures, not lion safaris, vineyard hills, or ocean sunsets. This is the other South Africa, the one beneath the photographs, the one built on laws and lined with wire. Here, books are not treasures. They are threats. You walk through Johannesburg. Rows of tin-roofed houses lean into each other like exhausted bones. Government buildings loom above, concrete, whitewashed, flanked by signs that divide reality. Europeans only. Non-whites prohibited. Even the air seems to separate. On a corner stands a library, grand, colonial, symmetrical. Its columns gleam. You step closer. It smells like lemon oil and old paper. But not everyone can breathe that in, because this library, like everything else here, is segregated, not just by skin, by thought. You try the side entrance. There, a teenager, maybe 16, stands at the doorway. Calm, curious, refused, not for shouting, not for stealing, but for asking to borrow a history book. His name is Themba. He walks beside you now, shoulders thin beneath his uniform. He carries no bag, just a tattered notebook, soft from use. Inside, quotes from Steve Biko, Frantz Fanon, Nelson Mandela, all copied by hand, all forbidden. He flips to the margins. You see symbols, codes, page numbers circled, entire chapters reduced to abbreviations, passed from desk to desk, like sweets wrapped in secrecy. This is what education looks like under apartheid. A whisper, a risk, a form of resistance. You follow Themba to the back of a church, a side room. The door creaks, then closes like a vow. Inside, a small circle of students sit cross-legged on a mat. In their hands, one single copy of The Wretched of the Earth, dog-eared, underlined, sacred. They read aloud, one paragraph each. Each sentence sounds like thunder, not because it shouts, but because it dares. One girl cries silently. Another writes as fast as her pencil allows, racing the silence before a knock on the door. A fringe fact? Under apartheid, possessing certain books was grounds for imprisonment. No trial, no appeal. Police raided homes, shredded manuscripts, burned libraries. But readers adapted. They smuggled pages in double-lined suitcases, taped essays to their torsos, hollowed out Bibles, and hid revolution in the Psalms. They memorized entire works, then retaught them, student by student, like oral scripture. You walk through Soweto. Walls speak in graffiti, slogans, symbols, warnings, and one line, scrawled in red beneath a broken window, stops you still. Reading is a crime when freedom is illegal. You find a safe house disguised as a kitchen. Steam rises from a pot of stew. Beneath the table, books wrapped in butcher paper. A teacher greets you. Her name is Zola. She leads you into the back room. A classroom without a name. There's a chalkboard, a smuggled map. Children, some as young as 10, reciting poetry of negritude, reading Fanon like gospel, debating theology like strategy. You ask how they're not afraid. Zola smiles, not gently but fiercely. Because we know why they want us silent. She tells you about Bantu education, a system designed to teach just enough to obey, but never enough to question. The curriculum was state-approved, sanitized. Black students were told they didn't need algebra, only obedience. They didn't need Shakespeare, just labor. Historians still debate. Was it about cost? About infrastructure? But here, watching Zola teach history written out of textbooks, the answer is clear. It was about fear. Fear of minds that could connect dots. Fear of students who might read beyond the page. You help carry butcher paper bundles across a dusty field. From afar, they look like groceries. But inside, revolutionaries. Baldwin, Marx, Biko, Sontag, Achebe. Their spines are cracked, their margins filled, their voices still intact. You stop at another schoolroom. A child is reading aloud from a banned biography of Nelson Mandela. Her voice is steady, no falter, no fear. You ask, why do you read? She doesn't hesitate, because once it's in my head, no one can take it. That night, you sleep on a cot beneath the floorboards of the school. The wood above you creaks with footsteps. Radios hiss, dogs bark, doors knock too long. But in the darkness, other sounds float, poems, debates, dreams spoken out loud by voices barely above a whisper. In the morning, Themba is gone. Taken, they say. Arrested for reading a banned poem on a public bus. No trial, no lawyer, just absence. But his notebook remains. You open it with care. Pages thick with ink, sketches, metaphors. On the last page, underlined twice, is a sentence. They can take my body. They can't unwrite my mind. You press the paper to your chest, and then you read it again. Because in this place, under this system, reading is not leisure, it's resistance. Remembering is rebellion. Teaching, even trying to, is risking your life for someone else's future. You leave South Africa different, not because of what you learned, but because of what others dared to learn. In silence, in danger, in defiant, trembling hope. You head west now. The landscape shifts again, not just in geography, but in pressure. The air thins, your breath shortens, the light sharpens into steel. You are high in the Andes, but this is no mountaintop for meditation. There are no prayer flags, no chants on the wind. This is Chile, and above it looms a name spoken like thunder in a church, General Augusto Pinochet. You descend into Santiago, a city caught in contradiction. The surface is quiet, controlled. Students walk to class, cafes hum softly, newspapers rustle in the breeze, headlines tucked into corners like secrets. But look longer. There are no protests, no chants, no slogans on the walls, no leaflets underfoot, just quiet eyes and the unmistakable ache of missing. Faces once familiar are no longer seen. The city has been shaved smooth, too smooth. You step into a university. The hallways echo. The light is sterile. On the surface, nothing is wrong, but something isn't there. You enter the library. The shelves are not empty, but they are stripped, hollowed. Entire sections are gone. Philosophy, history, political theory, Latin American literature, gone. A student lingers nearby, eyes alert, voice low. She's 19. Her name is Lucia. She leads you to the courtyard and opens her notebook, not to show what she's written, but what she's lost. A page torn out, charred at the corner. This was Neruda, she whispers. I had to destroy it when they searched my dorm. You blink. They call it safety, she says. We call it survival. Under Pinochet's rule, danger wasn't just in what you did, it was in what you knew. A poem could be a weapon, a syllabus an act of defiance, even a footnote could be grounds for arrest. Desaparecidos, they called them. The disappeared. Professors, students, journalists. Not fired, not reassigned. Just gone. No records, no graves, only gaps. In classrooms, in phone books, in memories. Lucia leads you down a side street at dusk, then a basement. No lights, no signs. Inside, 7 people, 1 candle, 1 battered copy of The Open Veins of Latin America. They read aloud, slowly, carefully. Each voice a thread in a tapestry that must never be seen, only felt. They speak in code. They annotate with silence. They discuss not just politics, but grief. Not just history, but absence. A fringe detail. During the dictatorship, teachers were instructed to report students who asked too many questions. Imagine that. Curiosity as subversion. Innocence as evidence. You walk through the National Stadium, once built for cheers, now echoing with ghosts. The bleachers are cold, concrete, unforgiving. Here poets were killed. Here Victor Jara had his fingers broken. The state's response to song. His guitar silenced, his voice beaten, his body thrown into a ditch. His crime. He sang truths too painful to ignore. Lucia hums one of his melodies. She doesn't finish, but she doesn't stop. You follow her beyond the city, to the countryside. In a dim house with barred windows and blackened shutters, a classroom waits. The chalkboard is painted on a wall. The students are workers, mechanics, farmers, midwives. They sit with backs to the door. If a car comes, they scatter. You help transcribe a banned Chilean novel, the kind that doesn't shout, but bleeds quietly between its lines. Every paragraph is typed twice, once for the group, once for someone in Argentina. Knowledge has no borders, the professor says, so repression must cross them too. That night, you hide books, 1 page at a time, slipped into hollowed encyclopedias, wrapped in wax paper, taped into medical pamphlets no one would suspect. At dawn, a knock. Too soft. Too soon. Breath catches. Chairs freeze. You count the seconds like heartbeats. False alarm. But the fear doesn't leave. Because here, every sentence might be your last. You walk through Santiago again. The sky is too blue. The streets too clean. But on a crumbling wall behind a shuttered bakery, you see a mural. Painted in moonlight. Probably illegal. A face with eyes closed. Hands cradling a book like a wounded animal. Beneath it, painted in uneven brushstrokes. We don't read to remember. We read so we cannot forget. Before you leave, you hand Lucia a small book of Neruda's poems. Worn, illegal. She tucks it into her coat, close to her heart, and smiles like someone accepting a secret too sacred to say aloud. You understand now. In places like this, truth doesn't come in fire. It doesn't march. It waits. It whispers. It survives. In a basement, in a melody, in a notebook buried beneath a bed frame. You look up, a bird cuts across the morning sky. Free. But down here, books still wear chains. And yet, they keep speaking. You step away from the Andes, but you're not lighter. You still carry echoes. Whispered poems tucked like passwords in the lining of your coat. The world turns under you, slow and grave, and you follow the sound of footsteps, the kind that mean something, the kind that build pressure before anyone dares to shout. Now you arrive in China, spring 1989, Beijing. The air smells of dust and diesel. The sky is soft but sharp, like paper folded too many times. And there, wide as silence, heavy as history, lies the square, Tiananmen. It stretches outward like a stage before the curtain rises, too large, too empty, too aware of itself, as if waiting for something it hopes won't come. But it will. You move among the students. They come in waves, thousands of them, not with torches, not with weapons, but with notebooks, scarves. Hope. They sit cross-legged in circles. They write banners and brushstrokes. They carry books like shields. Their jackets are denim, their shoes worn, their eyes wide, not with naivety, but with purpose. They read aloud. Passages from Confucius, Marx, John Locke, the American Constitution. They recite poetry in both Mandarin and English. Some of them chant, some sing. Some just read silently, as if each word is a kind of oxygen. You meet a student named Lin. His hair is messy, his voice is low. He's reading de Tocqueville of all things, in Mandarin, illegally translated, photocopied in fragments. He smiles. I've read it 4 times, he says. Each time, it got more dangerous. That's the tone here. This isn't a revolution. It's a study session, but one conducted in the open, in defiance, in hunger. They don't want to overthrow the state. They want a dialogue, transparency, a space to breathe. And books that don't carry official stamps, are the air. Historians still argue the numbers. Was it 100,000? 200? The truth swims under layers of denial. But one thing is certain. The students read like people who knew they were running out of time. You pass through tents, see posters covered in slogans, quotes from Montesquieu, Lucian, Camus, Rousseau. Some are handwritten in charcoal, some typed on borrowed typewriters. In the center of the square, someone has built a sculpture, foam and wire, a makeshift Statue of Liberty, torch raised high, flickering with a battery-powered light. And then, engines. At first, it's just vibration, a hum beneath your feet. Then the growl. The tanks arrive at dawn. Their shadows stretch across banners like spilled oil. The square holds its breath. Someone tells you to run. Some do. Some don't. You hide behind a vendor cart. The air is not yet filled with smoke, but it's already full of fear. Students form chains. They lock arms. Books fall from bags like startled birds. One rolls to your feet, a copy of Civil Disobedience by Thoreau. It's stained with tea, and something darker, a fringe detail, too often forgotten. As the tanks approached, students formed reading chains. They linked arms and passed banned books down the line, not to hide them, but to preserve them, a living conveyor belt of resistance. But it wasn't enough. By nightfall, the square is silent again, not healed, just scrubbed. The banners are gone, the books gone, the students gone. And officially, it never happened. But you know better. You walk through the streets of Beijing. Storefronts gleam, cameras click. Tourists pose where students once bled. The square is clean now. Too clean. No monuments, no plaques, only pigeons. And silence that wasn't born, but enforced. You meet a woman in her 60s. She was there. She remembers. Under her floorboards, she keeps a small collection of banned books, wrapped in plastic, protected like heirlooms. She opens one. The binding crackles like dry leaves. Inside, essays by Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel laureate who died in custody for daring to think out loud. This one, she says softly, touching the spine, got him 10 years. You ask why she still reads it. She looks at you without blinking. Because it still tells the truth. Later, you pass through Tiananmen again. It gleams. It poses. It forgets. Even the internet forgets. Even the algorithms look away. But books remember. And people, real people, remember. Even when they're told not to. Even when remembering is dangerous. Even when memory itself is declared illegal. You board a train out of the city. A man beside you reads the state newspaper. Headlines clean. Photos staged. But inside, barely visible, is a sliver of another page, a folded poem by Beidao, once exiled for saying, "I do not believe the sky is blue. I do not believe in thunder's echoes." He doesn't show it to you, but you saw it. You say nothing, because here, even believing is a kind of rebellion. And now you understand something permanent. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hides. In shoes, in sleeves, in poems tucked inside propaganda, in memory, in breath, in the soft act of flipping a page when no one's watching. And sometimes, even more dangerous, when everyone is. The train hums beneath you. Steel against steel. A quiet song you've heard across continents. It carried you through gulags and basements, across oceans and burned libraries, into squares lit by candles and courage. But now it brings you somewhere stranger. Not a war zone, not a dictatorship, not a shattered capital. You arrive in a living room, your own. The books here aren't banned, not officially. The walls don't whisper, the police don't knock. There's no secret reading group under the floorboards. Welcome to the present. Here, education isn't outlawed. It's managed. Not by rifles and fire, but by interfaces, by screens, by design. You sit on your couch. The blue light of your phone reflects in your eyes. Everything is available. Every book, every fact, every contradiction. You scroll, and somehow you learn nothing. Headlines race by like billboards on a highway you don't remember entering. Infographics, carousels, listicles. It feels like reading, but it isn't. Because now the truth isn't burned. It's buried, flooded by trivia, drowned in sponsored content. You pass a protest you didn't know happened. A banned author whose name doesn't auto-complete. A book once stocked everywhere, now quietly unlisted. No fire, no warning, just absence. Modern censorship doesn't wear a uniform. It wears sneakers, it drinks oat milk, It smiles politely and says, "Sorry, that content's not available in your region." You tap on a history video. It's animated, friendly, shareable, but you feel the edges have been sanded down. Something's missing. You just can't name it. Historians debate whether digital censorship is better or worse than the old kind. There are no bonfires now, but there are filters, shadow bans, demonetization. The fire may be gone, but the silence, still here. Just smarter, just quieter. You visit a library, a real one, bricks and aisles and dust. It smells like binding glue and fluorescent light. But here too the shelves are changing. You stop in front of a gap. The librarian leans over and whispers, "That one made people uncomfortable." No formal ban, no announcement, just gone. A fringe fact, in the past 5 years, thousands of books have vanished from school libraries and curriculums. Not by decree, but by review, by budget cuts, by quiet hands rearranging the shelves. It's called curation. But sometimes it's just fear dressed in neutral tones. You sit in a high school classroom. A teacher is explaining slavery, carefully. Too carefully. There are words she isn't allowed to use, authors she can't assign, facts she has to sidestep. A student raises a hand. "Didn't we read that book last year?" The teacher hesitates. It's not approved anymore. The room falls quiet, but a few kids exchange glances. Someone will find a PDF later. Someone always does, because curiosity still finds cracks. You visit a bookstore next. Bestsellers gleam on the tables. Romance, crime, cookbooks, memoirs with sanitized trauma and hopeful covers. But there's no banned bookshelf, no corner for the silenced. Because in this era, the most dangerous stories aren't or censored. They're never published at all. You meet a writer. She was exiled once. She wrote a memoir about it. 6 publishers declined. Not because it wasn't good, but because it was too specific, too foreign. Didn't test well with readers. Not banned, just inconvenient. She shrugs. "So now I teach." You sit in her class. She hands out photocopies. No barcode, no ISBN, just pages, just breath, just memory. You ask why she still bothers? She smiles, because stories that don't fit the feed still matter. Outside, protest signs are printed in Comic Sans. Hashtags trend and vanish like smoke signals in a wind tunnel. Outrage is a currency. Clicks are applause. But truth? Truth just sinks. You scroll again. War, celebrity scandal, climate alarm, cat video, deleted tweet, 1 second of clarity. Then, a dance challenge. You close your phone. Finally. Because sometimes, in a world this loud, the only way to hear anything true is to stop listening to the noise. You sit alone. Your room, your shelves, a few worn books, a few unread, one marked challenged in your county. You pick it up. The spine is cracked. The paper smells faintly of something old and urgent. And you read. Not because it's easy, not because it's required, not even because you know what you're looking for. You read because in a world of noise, reading with full attention may be the most rebellious act left. You read because someone tried to make sure you wouldn't. You read because someone else can't. You read so the silence doesn't win. You sit there still, book in lap. The hum of your phone has gone quiet. The world hasn't stopped spinning, but for the first time in a long while, you're not being spun with it. You're reading, eyes moving line by line like a ship navigating fog. You've been across oceans of silence, through fire, through policy, through erasure. And now you understand something ancient. Knowledge has never stopped being dangerous. It's only gotten better at hiding its scars. You turn the page. You don't flinch, because tonight, finally, it's just you, the words, and all the ghosts who dared to read before you. You step into a hallway, dim, endless, lined with doors. Each one bears a name: Hypatia, Socrates, Desmoulins, Mandela, Hara, Biko, Akhmatova, Lynn, Themba, Lucia, Galileo, Voltaire, Olympe. You open them one by one. The air stirs. Their voices rise, layered like smoke. Some whisper, some cry out, but all of them speak. And then you pass one final door. It has your name on it. You hesitate, then open it. Inside, a mirror. Because now it's your turn, not to fight, not to flee, but to decide. What will you do with what you know? Will you stay quiet? Will you forget? Or will you pick up the pen they dropped? You remember the girl in South Africa who said, "They can't unwrite my mind." You remember the man in Chile who hid poems in envelopes addressed to no one. You remember the students in Beijing standing unarmed before tanks, with nothing but books and hope. You remember the monk who copied stars by candlelight, the alchemist who boiled truth in mercury, the librarian who sewed banned scrolls into her skirts. You are all of them now, because you read their stories, and that means you carry them. A fringe tidbit? You've made it through 20 sections, over 20,000 words, across millennia of fire, silence, ink, and resistance. And you didn't break. You stayed. You listened. And maybe, just maybe, something in you changed. You step into the last chamber, and it's empty. No torches, no chains, no judges, just you, a book in hand, and the soft breath of pages turning. You understand now. Education was never supposed to be safe. Truth, real truth, doesn't just inform. It rearranges the furniture inside you. It cracks the walls, tears the wallpaper, rewrites the blueprints. That's why they've always feared it, but not you. You press the book to your chest, not to keep it, but to pass it on, because somewhere, someone is still in the dark. And you? You've seen the fire. You've held the smoke. You've walked through history barefoot, past ashes, past armor, past absence, and into the present. And now you stand lit from within. You know too much to ever be silent again. Now, just rest. Let the echo of those pages fade into stillness. Let the fire burn low, warm and watchful. You've walked far tonight, across centuries, across continents, through censorship in all its masks, flaming, frozen, and algorithmic. You've been the monk in the scriptorium, hiding heresy in the margins, the rebel in the alley, reciting verses no law could erase, the student in the square, head high, spine straight, with nothing but a book between you and the world. And now, you're home. The voices you heard tonight, they won't vanish. They'll stay as they should. Not heavy, but humming. You don't have to carry them all the time, but don't let them be forgotten either. Let your breath slow. Let your eyes soften. The fear that once hunted the educated, it's still out there. Quieter now. Wearing a suit instead of a sword. Smiling instead of shouting. But watching. Always watching. 'Cause truth is still dangerous and still gentle. Like this moment, like the silence after the last sentence. You've earned your rest, so breathe. Sink into your pillow. Let the world be soft again. Let the ideas you gathered tonight settle like dust on a forgotten shelf. Quiet, but ready. Should you ever need them, they'll be waiting. Whispering. The flame is low now. The room is still. Close your eyes. You are safe. You are wiser. And you are not alone. If you've made it all the way to the end, leave a comment and tell me what story you'd like to hear next. I genuinely enjoy seeing and reading every kind word you share. Thank you for watching. Sweet dreams and good night.